Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
If you think about it cynically, one of the functions of the police is to provide a sort of society-wide revenge service. Unfortunately for this sub, it's usually kinda boring. When cops do take exceptional revenge, it's usually unfortunate and icky, like a dirty beating in the no-camera areas of the cop shop, or giving someone a silent patrolman treatment during transport. Fortunately, most cop revenge isn't dramatic, it's procedural. You misbehave, we do the paperwork, and eventually some consequences happen, or not. Sometimes, however, you get a chance to take a bit of vengeance that is, I hope, the very definition of professional. For a time, I was a small-town Canadian cop working in a small town in a Canadian province. Several years before I came to work in a town, there was an event which entered town legend and made national news. The funny little throwaway story they go to just before the end of the broadcast. Some kids committed an act of spectacular and iconic vandalism and cost the town quite a bit of money. They were all caught, tried, and sentenced to probation terms with restitution. I would love to provide details, but anything more would be immediately identified. All but one of the kids paid off quickly, served their probation without major incident, and moved on with their lives. These were juvenile sentences that would be in the ordinary course of things be purged from their records about 2 years after completion of probation. Unfortunately for one of them, whom we were referred to as Lackwit hereafter, this was only the beginning of a pattern of failure and incompetence that would mark his life from then on. Lackwit came from the kind of low-down redneck family that can meet the standards of a transient trailer park. They lived in decrepit trailers on a semi-serviced rural property that someone lent them out of pity. I wish I could tell you the moronic and laughable names these cretinous parents inflicted on their kids. Think Jesse James for the boys and Jezebel for the girls, and you're aiming too classy. I suppose his unfortunate nature wasn't his fault. Lackwit seemed so dedicated to his banal evil and low-grade crime that any sympathy I might have had just kind of melted away. When I first arrived at the post, I was given my share of the list of the area's repeat offenders, who it would be my job to keep tabs on. Basically, the boss divided up all the guys and gals on probation or other court supervision, and every constable was responsible for any new charges involving one of their guys. Lackwit was to be my problem for the next 3 to 5 years. I spoke with his probation officer and was told that Lackwit hadn't paid 1 dime of his restitution, and in fact had been charged with breaching his probation by not doing so. He had also not been doing requirement community service, had missed probation appointments, and was generally not a great subject. She recommended additional breach charges, which we duly laid. The matter wended its leisurely way through the justice system, and eventually Lackwit appeared before a judge. As in these rural circuits, the judges come by once a day, a month. And it's frequently the same judge seeing these redneck recidivists again and again. This judge turned out to be the same one who had sentenced Lackwit to probation for his initial vandalism and the subsequent breaches. Of course, on each of these occasions, Lackwit had begged the mercy of the court, promised to get his life together, and so on. I understand we're now more than 4 years out from the initial vandalism event. This might have worked on this occasion too, but the restitution became a sticking point. This town was small, and they needed the money from the restitution to repair some of the damage. We had a victim statement from the town about the things they couldn't afford to do without raising rates on their taxpayers. We had evidence of the reasons Lackwit wasn't holding down jobs: attendance, unreliability, pot use at work, and we had evidence of the money he had made but not bothered to pay to the town. The judge decides to throw the book at Lackwit this time. He puts him on a CSO. Although Lackwit's original charges were youth charges that would have been purged, his breach of probation occurred after his 18th birthday, so is an adult charge and semi-permanent on his record. Nice work, chump. A digression on the Canadian justice system. We don't like to put people in prison. This is for a number of reasons. We're cheap and prison is expensive. Our jails are hideously overcrowded and ill-maintained. and it flat out doesn't work anyways. Trust me on this, if you aren't committing crimes against persons or involving sex or firearms, you aren't likely to go to jail on a first offense unless you're doing damage/stealing into the millions. End digression. A CSO is like a super probation order. It's technically a jail sentence, but one you serve outside of jail. The judge can order you to stay at a particular location, can give you a curfew or house arrest, can impose practically any conditions he/she feels will assist you in successfully completing your terms. The CSO also has some procedural differences from a probation order, which will be important later. In this case, it had a pretty strict curfew, among other things. Lackwit is terrible at complying with his order. We give him a few warnings about curfew breaches and notify his PO. Lackwit is formally cautioned. It comes to pass that Lackwit asks probation for permission to do a thing and is denied. Lackwit does a thing anyways and becomes aware that we know about it. We stop by Lackwit's house to have a discussion and Lackwit decides to go on a lam. He rabbits, but we don't see him again for a while. A breach of the CSO is filed and approved by prosecution. At this point, Lackwit knows he's going to be jailed for at least a week or two, and being a virgin jail-wise, has no intention of being caught. Over the next few weeks, we are told by sources, you would call them snitches, what Lackwit is up to. He has couch-surfed until he wore out his welcome with his few friends, and is now living in an abandoned car behind a friend's house. Friend's dad hates him, so Lackwit has to sneak in and out and spends his day wandering disconsolately around town trying to find people to hang out with, or who might lend him money. I begin to see Lackwit around town but pretend not to. I go by his house from time to time but he's never home. Sources say his parents want him to turn himself in and get us other back, but he's convinced he's going to go to jail and get murder-raped. Not likely, but hey, he hasn't let us explain that, and they will not let him stay there. I visit his friends and make a point of being very obvious when I visit friend's house with a derelict car. I never find Lackwit, but I'm told that he spent several cold nights in the bush after our visits. But this time, I have a rookie with me. One day we come across Lackwit and he bolts. Rookie is gung-ho, and she starts to chase. I catch up and after a token effort, tell her to stop. She asks why. We could have caught him. Hell, Lackwit is lanky but has a grace and coordination of a professional esports player. Even with 20 kilograms of crap strapped on, catching him isn't going to be a problem. Look, I tell the rookie, I don't want to actually catch Lackwit. The rookie is baffled. We've been out to look for Lackwit maybe a half dozen times this month. I explain. The thing is, Lackwit is punishing himself far more than a court will, and he's providing a great lesson to his friends about the consequences of this kind of life. Now the thing about a probation order is that it has a fixed duration. From the date you begin to serve it, it runs for X months. If you're out of the country, in jail or on the run, the order still runs out. CSO doesn't work this way. If a CSO breach is filed, the CSO stops counting down. I tell this to my wide-eyed rookie, then add, if I picked him up 3 months ago, he'd have done a week or so in cells with a warm bed and 3 meals a day, then been out again with a firm slap on a wrist. This way he can live like a hunted animal until he gets tired of it, then serve the same amount of time as he would have if he just turned himself in. He ended up turning himself in a couple of months later, when the fall nights got a bit too nippy for him. For the next few years I would use a story, now well known locally, of Lackwit's compartment to frighten young juvenile offenders and to convince them to comply with probation. My local drugstore is having a gift card promotion. They are offering gift cards for a major chain hardware store at 10% off face value. They let you pay by credit card and get cash back, and you get reward points at the hardware store. Not only that, it's nearly Black Friday. I wanted to buy some semi-expensive tools and I figured I'd stack as many discounts as I could. So I went to the drugstore and asked for $1,500 in gift cards. A very friendly assistant manager showed up near instantly to triple-check my ID and casually mention how gift card scam works. Rewind a year, I read an article in our newspaper about this unfortunate person who lost $3,500 to the CRA IRS if you're American scam. I'm sure you've heard of it. Someone with an accent calls you, tells you you owe an exorbitant amount of your income taxes, tells you to buy iTunes gift cards, scratch out the security strip, and read them the numbers. If you refuse, they threaten you with arrest. It's an obvious scam to anyone with half a brain. At the time, I wondered just how a store could not know about this scam, and why they would in good conscience sell thousands of dollars in iTunes gift cards and not find it suspicious. And now I know. This assistant manager says, last year, this customer came in and asked for $2,500 in iTunes cards. I knew right away it was a scam and started to explain how the scam worked. This individual wasn't having it. She became belligerent and she started swearing at us and threatening us. So this poor assistant manager, who's probably had a career full of bending over for angry customers who have learned they can get discounts and free stuff if they are jerks, decides to get revenge. And here is where the malicious compliance comes in. The assistant manager sells $2,500 worth of iTunes gift cards. 45 minutes later, the customer is back with the cops. They had left and bought an additional $2,500 at another store. The scammer then told him it still wasn't enough and to go to a third store. At that point, the victim realized there was an itsy-bitsy teeny-weeny yellow possibility that this may be a scam. The cops called Apple. $3,500 of the gift cards had already been used. They voided the remaining $1,500 and the customer was refunded after a time. I hate some of my customers, but I like to think I would not go as far as helping them get scammed out of thousands of dollars. But today, I met someone jaded enough to do just that. So this weekend I was supposed to pick up my mom from my grandparents' place since my dad was out of town and the place is 100 kilometers away from our city. Mom has a driver's license but does not drive. Since I don't trust my car to leave the city with it, I proceed to take my dad's car that he left at home to go pick up mom. Since I would not be using my own car for the duration, I decided to give it to my girlfriend to go shopping and such while I'm gone. So we wake up Sunday morning, we live together, get in my car, and I drive us to my parents' place to pick up my dad's car. I live in my dad's car and my girlfriend lives in mine. I didn't even make it out of the city and I got a call from her asking if I could come back since she had been in an accident. I head back since the site of the accident was at the very end of the street we lived on. Once I get there, I find out that once she reached the end of the street, she made a right turn and hit the first two cars parked on her right. Honestly, I didn't know how to contain my laughter. I mean, hitting a parked car? No, two parked cars? Well, that takes skill. So I proceed to talk with the owners of the cars and offered to pay for everything since my girlfriend was at fault. I had no problem going to the police, except for the 3 to 6 hour waiting time every time you go to the accidents department, but offered to fill out an IMAPL form. This is something we have in my country where if you have an accident both sides, just fill out the form and be on their way without contacting the police. I live in the capital city and we get lots of accidents on a daily basis. Since it was Sunday and all the insurance places were closed, I could not acquire such form, so I proceeded to let them photograph my insurance, exchanged phone numbers, and assured them that we were neighbors and that tomorrow, Monday, I would contact them with the form to fill it out. All is fine and I leave for my grandparents' place. And on the way there, I contacted a friend that works for insurance and he mailed me a form along with a reference for a service station that would have their cars repaired in a day. I proceed to call the guys and tell them that I will be back in a couple of hours with the form and we will get everything settled today. To this, one of the guys says, in his position, he's entitled to go to the police, so he will be waiting for us there if we decide to come. This is where I pulled the 180. So I was trying to be a decent human being and repair the damage my girlfriend caused, and this guy wanted to waste 3 to 6 hours of my Sunday because he felt entitled? Okay, alright, fine. At this point, it may be useful to mention that I have studied law to a master's degree, had a degree, and have been working at law firms for over 5 years, so I pretty much know the laws better than the cops. Karma starts to kick in. I call the guys on the way back from my grandparents and ask them to grab a copy of the form that needs to be filled out for me as well. These forms have a number order on them and first come first serve. They tell me they cannot since there is only one per person. This is nonsense. I know this for a fact. When you ask for such a form, the cops even ask if the other party is here to give one for them too. Regardless, I got there after they had been waiting for about 2 to 3 hours and requested the form. They had numbers 56, 57, and I had 89. Mind you, each case takes about 20 to 30 minutes. Lazy jerks. So when their number came up, I was just getting my form, and as they entered the office, I also entered and asked the cop, I'm also a part of this incident, as it was a three-way accident. Should I not also be here when you talk to the other two parts? The cop proceeds to tell the guys to leave his office and come back when all three of us have filled out the report. The guys proceed to wait another 30 minutes for my girlfriend to fill out the report, and then we all go in once she's done. Now we get to the core of the problem. The most incompetent police officer I have ever seen. I am sure even those among you with no legal background or knowledge will see how pathetic this guy is. People who filed reports, the other two guys, one of them didn't even have a driver's license because it was his mom's car and his girlfriend filled the report. The other guy had a driver's license and filed his own report although the car belonged to his parents. This is relevant since the only people legally allowed to file that report is either the owner of the car or the person driving it at the time, of which none of these two were. The cop finds my girlfriend guilty, as she truly was, for God's sake, and proceeds to fill out the paperwork. I ask him, Officer, do you know the regulations for parking on a street this incident happened on? No. And do you not think it's relevant to the case? Now, I don't remember exactly what he said, but it was all gibberish ending up with, you really dislike cops, don't you? To which I answer, I dislike incompetent individuals in any profession. He ends up getting his way since he was the authority in the situation and proceeds to ticket my girlfriend and hand the guys copies of my insurance to get their cars fixed. Edit. Small detail I left out. The cop did not take pictures of the damaged cars, as is mandatory by law for any case that comes across his desk. He literally has no evidence an accident ever happened apart from the words of the other two guys. I am sure that any policeman reading this would have a field day. Cue karma. As soon as I get home, I start to do exactly what society and my profession taught me. Sue him. I filed a lawsuit on Monday and got a date in 4 months. Litigation in non-penal cases is very slow in my country. Usual time to finish a lawsuit is anywhere between 1 to 8 years, depending on how much your lawyer wants to push it. The thing is that she was in fact at fault, and had they just taken me up on my offer and not wasted my time, they would have their car fixed by now, Tuesday. But they were entitled to go to the police. Fact, parking regulations on that street, as any other for a matter of fact, state that cars should be parked parallel to the sidewalk, not on it. Not perpendicular, parallel. The street has a few apartment buildings, so there is nowhere near enough parking places, so the neighbors made a convention to park perpendicular to the sidewalk to fit more cars, taking up a whole lane of traffic, but that's another story. The thing with conventions is that it's all fine and dandy till something happens and the police gets involved. Then law states you must take responsibility for what happened. So basically, there is no chance whatsoever that we will lose this lawsuit, and I will even drag it out as much as possible. I am thinking I could get it up to 4 to 5 years, no problems. Now another kink is a law that states that any item that is under litigation does not produce legal effects. In translation, this means that until the judge gives a verdict to my lawsuit, the ticket is suspended, so the guys will not be able to fix their cars, not even on their own time. It's somewhat assimilated to evidence, but at a much lower scale. Also, once the process is over, not only will I not be paying for the repair, they will be paying for mine. My main argument in a lawsuit is a legal concept known as casualty link, which applied to my case means, yes, my girlfriend caused an accident, but that accident was caused by you parking your cars illegally. If you would have parked legally, there would have been more room. Your car would not have been in that spot and thus would not have been hit. regardless of my girlfriend's actions. So basically, your action of parking perpendicularly caused the damage to my car. I never imagined the regular trip to the grocery store with my dad could turn into a story I'd need to share. Being 7 months pregnant, I was already navigating the challenges of my changing body. My dad decided to accompany me for some grocery shopping, ensuring that I had support if I needed it. As we were browsing the aisles, I separated from my dad to pick up some prenatal vitamins, and that's when I heard a dreaded, "Excuse me," in a tone that I already knew spelled trouble. I turned around to see a middle-aged woman with a haircut that screamed I meant to speak to your manager, barreling towards me. "Yes?" I asked, puzzled but polite. "Where are the organic cereals? You people never stock them properly," she barked, glaring at me as if I had personally offended her. I was taken aback. "I'm sorry, I don't work here. I'm just shopping," I explained, gesturing to my very non-employee-like outfit and my prominent baby bump. Instead of apologizing or even acknowledging her mistake, her face contorted into an even deeper scowl. "Don't lie to me. You're just being lazy. Help me now." I was about to respond when she did the unthinkable. With a huff, she reached out and shoved me, causing me to stumble backward. Fear and shock coursed through me as I tried to regain my balance. My hands instinctively go into my belly, and that's when my dad appeared, seemingly out of nowhere. With reflexes I didn't know he possessed, he caught the woman's arm mid-air as she was about to shove me again. "That's enough," he thundered, his voice carrying an authority that made even Karen pause. "Who do you think you are?" she shrieked, trying to free her arm from his grip. "I'm someone who won't tolerate assault, especially not against my pregnant daughter," my dad replied. Karen's eyes widened as she finally took in the scene properly. The concern in my dad's eyes, my hands on my belly, in a gathering crowd. "I thought you worked here," she stammered, her confidence faltering. "That doesn't give you the right to lay hands on anyone," my dad shot back. "And for your information, or prison charges." The color drained from Karen's face at the mention of this. Also, my dad is well known in our community, not just for his profession, but for his kindness and fairness. Before she could muster a response, security arrived, followed by the police. Witnesses had already filled them in, and as they handcuffed Karen, one of the officers said, "You're being arrested for assault. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The officer then glanced at my dad, nodding with respect. "Judge Stinson, we'll ensure she's processed accordingly. Is your daughter all right?" The realization that she had not only attacked a pregnant woman but also the daughter of a judge seemed to sober her arrogance instantly. Thankfully, aside from the scare and a bit of soreness, I was fine. My dad thanked the officer and turned his attention to me, his demeanor softening. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" I nodded, still shaken but grateful for his intervention. "Yeah, Dad, thanks to you." As Karen was led away, her earlier bravado completely dissolved into panicked pleas. It was clear she hadn't expected her entitlement to lead to such dire consequences. So, to anyone reading this, let my story be a reminder. Kindness costs nothing, but entitlement can cost you everything. And you never know when you might be shoving a judge's daughter in a grocery store. This happened several years ago. I was working full-time job at a mediocre paying job while putting myself through college at night paying for it out of pocket. This left me stretched on finances, so I ended up in a less than ideal apartment complex, and by less than ideal I mean that the cops maintain the present there most of the time. Most folks kept to themselves, but occasionally you get someone that was just obnoxious living near you. It was inevitable. I knew it was my turn with an obnoxious neighbor when I first met him. He was talking loudly in a breezeway of my building. Why he wasn't on a balcony of his apartment, I don't know. Not wanting to be petty, I just turned the TV up and ignored him. It wasn't long before the talking got louder and my door started moving like someone was trying to open it. I jerked it open and the guy fell in. It turns out he was leaning on it while having his conversation. After politely letting him know that it was very annoying, I gave him a good, "It's all good," and closed my door. Immediately he refers to me using a racial slur in Spanish to the person on the other end of the phone. I may not be fluent in Spanish, but I know some important slang. He'd have parties all night sometimes, with a dozen people in the breezeway getting drunk and rowdy. There was always trash on the stairs. Example, half-eaten cheeseburgers, old milkshakes, and so on. And cigarette butts everywhere, by the way. His large pit bull would bark all day just about non-stop. I could witch about it and be the whiny neighbor, or just bide my time until I graduate and then move. Graduation was only a semester away, so I decided to bide my time. Coming home from school one night, I'm walking through the parking lot reading my phone when I see a dog running at me growling. It's the dude's pit bull rearing to attack me. The dude's girlfriend yells at him and he calls his dog off and breaks out laughing. Enough is enough. Someone's going to get hurt, so I complain to the apartment manager, but I'm told without proof their hands were tied. Great. I live the next few months at the complex relatively incident-free, just the above annoyances, until I'm woken up one weeknight at 2 a.m. There's screaming and crying in the breezeway, lots of loud talking, and the sounds of incoming sirens. Looking out my window into the parking lot, and I see a dude run by with his dog. Looking through the peephole, I see a girl in the hallway bleeding profusely. Turns out his girlfriend and her friend were drunk and raised their voices at one another. The dog then attacked the friend, mauling her pretty badly. Police didn't know where either the dude or the dog was, and the friend didn't want to pursue charges. So, they left. Shortly after they left, the dude came back with a dog. I did call the police and let them know that he and the dog were back, but they never returned. Thanks police. On my way to work the next morning, I stopped by the apartment manager and let her know about the incident. Again, she says she can't do anything without proof. I implore her to call the police and confirm, but she refuses, saying they get updates from the sheriff every month. Ultimately, her problem was that, due to legal reasons, she can't seek to evict someone herself. Otherwise, it might look like she's targeting a given race or something. Fuming about the situation while at work, I managed to find a police incident report for the mauling online. I printed it out and delivered it to her on my way home. She had an appreciative look on her face and told me the eviction process would start before I could leave the building. And true to her word, the bad neighbor was out at the end of the month. According to the apartment manager, they were pissed and cussing as they drove away. Turns out he had numerous warrants, so had his girlfriend rent the apartment. Neither of them had family in the area. The girlfriend's family lived in another country, so they had no one to turn to for a place to stay. The icing on a cake was when the apartment manager let slip that when the next apartment called her for reference, she'd kindly inform them of all the incident that occurred. I don't know what happened to them, but I do know they had a hard time finding a place to live. Here is a story of how I accidentally got some petty revenge on a particularly annoying drunk driver. This was back in the day I was working as a municipal police officer. I worked a traffic/DUI shift, which means my shift started at 4 p.m. I worked rush hour traffic enforcement. Then the last half of my 12-hour shift I was assigned to patrol and find drunk drivers. In my opinion, the 4 p.m. to 4 a.m. is the best shift in law enforcement. On this day, I had an eventful shift, dealt with a few speeders and aggressive drivers, went as backup to a couple of interesting calls, but no drunks. So 4 a.m. rolls around and it's time to head home. I had a take-home car, which was nice, but I worked for a municipality and lived 20 minutes away. This means I cannot leave the city limits until my shift is over, so I still had about 20-minute drive to get home. I got pretty good at the timing, and tonight I had it perfect. The clock hit 0400 hours. The clock hit 0400 hours just as I drove past the city limits sign. I keyed up the mic and called out off duty. Just as I get the reply from dispatch, I turn down the police radio and turn up the car stereo, and I have about 20 minutes to listen to some good music and de-stress a bit before getting home. Well, I'm driving home in a neighboring city and suddenly a Mustang makes a right turn on red right in front of me. I had to slam brakes and swerve to avoid the collision. It pisses me off, but I'm off duty, I'm out of my jurisdiction, and I just want to go home and get some sleep. So no harm, no foul. I just get back into my lane and continue down the road. As I'm following the Mustang though, it quickly becomes apparent the driver is drunk. And I mean drunk. He's all over the road, he's rubbing against the curb on one side, then suddenly straddling the double yellow line, then back against the curb. I drop back away from him to avoid getting caught up in anything if he hits something. It's 4 a.m., it really is just the two of us on this road. I'm actually yelling at him through the windshield of my car. I just want to go home. Get it together, man. Well, his driving is getting worse, and we're getting close to a populated area. If I don't do something, he's going to kill somebody. So I grab the radio and call out to the neighboring department and let them know what I have. I am hoping there is a nearby officer that can just roll up, watch the car long enough to see the issue and generate his own traffic stop so I can simply tag out and continue home. As their dispatch is trying to find an available unit, their watch commander gets on a radio and asks where I am. I let him know we were about to enter a residential area, so he made an official mutual aid request, which authorizes me to initiate a traffic stop, which I do. So much for going home on time. I make initial contact with the driver and yes, he is hammered drunk. Within a minute, a local cop arrives to take over the case. I let him know what I have and start a statement for him, as he begins his drunk driving investigation. The watch commander shows up, I hand him my statement, and we have a few minutes to chat while the officer goes through the exercises with a very drunk driver. After a few minutes, the driver is cuffed and placed in the back of the officer's car. The watch commander thanked me for keeping that guy out of their residential area and let me go. This adds about 45 minutes to my shift, which isn't too bad, but I could have been asleep by now. This really was just a routine DUI arrest, so I hear nothing about it until about 2 months later. I get a subpoena for a driver's license hearing for this guy. Now everything I did for this arrest was documented in the neighboring department system, so I called the arresting officer and requested a copy of my statement so I could prepare for the hearing, and I got the rest of the story. After I cleared, the driver, Drunky McDrunkface, became angry. He became a jerk to anyone who looked at him, screaming, yelling, spitting, and really acting out. They took him to the presider at the jail for a BAC reading. They sat him down and read all the required readings to officially request his press. He played around with a breathing tube for a minute before faking a heart attack. They said he stood up, clutched at his chest, and stuck his left arm straight out, like Sanford and Son, and then collapsed on the floor. They immediately called an ambulance. Once the ambulance showed up, he was miraculously cured of the heart attack. But that is not how it works. In our area, if you claim chest pains while in custody, you are going to the hospital and getting checked. So off he goes to the emergency room. While at the ER, the cop waits patiently while the doctors and nurses confirm nothing is really going on. I will monitor him for a while to make sure. While they were stuck there, the cop reads the paperwork again and officially requests a blood sample for blood alcohol testing. Drunky refuses a blood test. That's fine. That is his right. But the officer was so annoyed at this guy. He wrote 2 separate refusal citations. One for the refusal at the presider and the second for the blood refusal at the hospital. By the letter of the law, the officer is correct. Those are 2 separate refusals. I've never done it that way, but it wasn't wrong. He had all that time to kill at the ER, so why not type up all that paperwork twice? Anyway, I attended the license hearing. This hearing is only about the driver's license suspension for the refusal. The only question is, did the officers have enough probable cause to request a test of the driver's breath, blood, or urine? If the hearing officer determines there was probable cause, then Drunky's driver's license is suspended for refusing the test. Now, the defense attorneys are usually pretty strict and can be jerks towards the officers in these hearings. If they win this hearing, then a probable cause is thrown out, meaning everything that happened during the stop is also thrown out and makes it an easy win for the defense. So they play it tough for these hearings. This one was tough, but professional was me. His client, Drunky, on the other hand, was giving me the death stare the entire hearing. Once the hearing was over, we were all walking out to our cars and Drunky was right up in my ear, talking some serious smack at me. He's gonna win, I suck, my mother sucks, I'm dumb as hell and never should have messed with him. He's gonna sue me and take my house. Well, and all that crap. I never responded. Nothing good can come from engaging in anything with him. So I simply walked quietly and allowed him to insult everything about me. He lost the hearing and they suspended his driver's license for 6 months. Well, 2 weeks later I have another license hearing for this guy. This one is for the second refusal at the hospital. We go through the same routine. Drunky lost the first hearing and is about to lose this one as well. The hearing officer knows it, the defense attorney knows it, and I know it. They ruled right there on the spot and suspended his license for 18 months for a second refusal. On the way to the cars, Drunky started his routine again, screaming and yelling at me the whole way. As the case worked its way through the court system, there were several pre-trial hearings. At each hearing, I showed up, testified to what I saw, and on the way out, Drunky always found a way to talk some smack to me. Every time. I never engaged with him, just walked quietly while he talked his bull. We finally got to trial, and the trial goes well. But in the end, the jury finds him not guilty. It happens. Juries don't like to find drunk drivers guilty sometimes. We had a good case, but the jury let him go. Just as luck would have it, after the trial I step into the elevator, and here comes Drunky and his attorney. The entire elevator ride down and the walk out to the parking lot, Drunky was letting me have it. Let me know he won, I lost, and he told me so. I suck, he's going to sue me, he's going to own me when this is done, and more insults. He never stopped yelling at me. I was actually a little impressed at his stamina and creativity in his insults. The whole walk out to the car, he was going at it. I never responded or engaged with him. I just got into my car and drove away. A few weeks later, I got called back to the station. There was someone in the lobby to speak with me. When I arrived, it was a defense attorney. Now that all the paperwork was done and the case was closed, he wanted to apologize to me for the way his client acted. We spoke for a few minutes and I asked him, how much did you charge him to defend this case? He said the defendant paid him $8,000 for the case. I simply replied, Drunky may have won the trial, but he still got arrested that night. His car still got towed. He faked his heart attack before being booked, so he had to pay for the ambulance ride and the emergency room visit. He was cleared by the ER doctor, so he still spent the night in jail. He lost both license hearings, so his driver's license was suspended for 18 months. He has 2 refusals on his driving record, which means he pays top dollar for car insurance for the next several years. And finally, he had to pay you $8,000 to get him through all of this. I'm a night shift officer that got overtime pay for the night of the arrest, every hearing, and the trial.